There are moments in life when silence feels louder than any sound. For months now, a single question has been echoing through quiet living rooms, news broadcasts, and online whispers alike. Is Diddy snitching? The name alone stirs something deep in the American imagination. A man once known for his power, his parties, his empire, and his confidence. Now he sits in a cell, far from the glittering lights that once surrounded him, facing a world that seems eager to watch him unravel. When the story broke that an inmate had reportedly held a knife to Diddy's throat inside Brooklyn Federal Prison, the world gasped. The thought of one of music's most powerful figures cornered, frightened, vulnerable. It struck a chord of disbelief. And yet, almost immediately, that familiar voice of mockery rose from the shadows. 50 Cent, the rapper known for his sharp humor and relentless teasing, went online to poke fun at the situation. "Is he snitching now?" he asked, half joking, half provoking. The comment caught fire. Within hours, it was everywhere. But behind the laughter, there was a deeper tension, because the truth is, no one really knows what Diddy might be doing behind closed doors. To those who have followed his long, winding career, the idea doesn't seem impossible. Diddy has always been connected, not just in music, but in business, sports, fashion, and film. His world once stretched into every corner of American entertainment. The people he knew, the stories he heard, the rooms he entered. There are few in modern celebrity life who could claim to know as much as he does. And when someone with that much knowledge is suddenly trapped, isolated, desperate, it's natural to wonder. How far would they go to survive? These are the quiet questions people whisper to themselves late at night, scrolling through their phones, trying to piece together the puzzle. Maybe he's cooperating, they think. Maybe he's talking. Maybe he's trading stories for safety. Or maybe it's all just rumor. The kind of rumor that grows like wildfire whenever the powerful fall. But the story doesn't end there. Because as Diddy sits behind bars, something else has been unfolding. A sprawling federal investigation that reads like a crime novel, connecting athletes, gambling rings, mafia families, and the very same circles of wealth and celebrity that once surrounded him. The FBI recently exposed two shocking cases, both sprawling webs of deceit and greed. In the first, several NBA figures were accused of insider sports betting, allegedly using confidential information about games to win enormous sums of money. Names like Billups, Rozier, and Jones appeared in the headlines, accused of tipping off gamblers about injuries and early exits, helping them pocket tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, at a time. What started as whispers in locker rooms has turned into criminal indictments, and it has shaken the sports world to its core. The second case, even darker, involved an elaborate illegal poker network run by powerful crime families across New York. The names are straight out of old mob history. The Bonanos, the Gambinos, the Genovese, the Lucchese's. For years, according to prosecutors, they had been luring wealthy players into games that were never fair. Hidden cameras, contact lenses that could read marked cards, X-ray poker tables, and rigged shufflers. Tools of deception straight out of a movie script. Some victims lost millions in a single night. In total, federal agents estimate more than $7 million were stolen through this scheme, using technology and manipulation to drain fortunes under the guise of luxury and exclusivity. And that's where the story begins to twist back toward the world Diddy once ruled. Because one of the locations at the center of this illegal poker network turned out to be a familiar address. A luxurious Greenwich Village townhouse, once home to none other than Kylie Jenner and Travis Scott. For years, the property had appeared on television, featured in Kardashian reality episodes, presented as a symbol of young success and family glamour. But beneath the marble counters and designer lighting, investigators say, the poker tables were alive. Games running deep into the night, fortunes changing hands, technology humming quietly under the surface. Federal records do not accuse Kylie or Travis of any wrongdoing, and their names appear only as former tenants. Yet the coincidence is haunting. How could the same home that once appeared so innocent on national television become the center of such a shadowy scandal? For many older Americans who have watched decades of Hollywood stories unfold, from studio scandals of the 1940s to reality TV controversies of the 2000s, this new wave feels eerily familiar. The faces change, the headlines evolve, but the pattern remains. Power, secrecy, temptation, and the slow, steady unraveling of those who once seemed untouchable. And this is where Diddy's story begins to blur with the rest. Because long before these poker games and betting schemes came to light, Diddy was famous for one thing besides music: control. He controlled his image, his spaces, his parties. Reports over the years have suggested that cameras were always around him, recording, observing, preserving moments others might have preferred to forget. He was a man who knew how to document power, and in the world of secrets, that kind of awareness can be a weapon. So when people whisper that he might be snitching, it's not always said with anger. Sometimes it's said with a strange kind of respect, or pity. They see a man who built a kingdom, now forced to bargain with the same forces that once protected him. They see survival instincts sharpened by years of navigating fame's darkest corners. And in that light, snitching becomes less about betrayal and more about endurance, a way of staying alive when the walls begin to close in. Still, no one can say for sure. Maybe he's not talking at all. Maybe the stories are just that, stories. But if he is cooperating, who could blame him? Inside prison walls, loyalty and silence mean very different things than they do outside. A man who once stood atop the world now finds himself measuring time in heartbeats and headlines. And if the cost of peace is information, well, many before him have paid the same price. As the FBI continues to dig through files and evidence, the entertainment world watches quietly. Agents have promised that the cases already made public are only the beginning, that more arrests will follow, more names will drop, more secrets will surface. And those who have spent their lives in the glow of fame are suddenly feeling the heat of exposure. For viewers across the country, especially those who have lived through decades of American scandals, from Sinatra's rumored mob ties to Enron's financial collapse, the Diddy saga feels like a familiar reflection of how power always bends towards secrecy. It's not about music or fashion anymore. It's about human nature. The bigger the dream, the greater the fall. And so, as this story unfolds, one can't help but wonder, what happens when a man who once knew everything suddenly has nothing left but the truth? Will he hold it, or will he trade it? Will his silence be his strength, or his undoing? For now, Diddy sits behind bars, a shadow of the mogul he once was. Outside, the world speculates, analyzes, and gossips. But somewhere in the middle of all that noise lies a very human story. A man facing the consequences of choices made long ago, trying to find a way back to the light in a world that remembers everything he's done. The headlines might call it snitching, but for those who have seen the cycles of fame, fall, and redemption across the years, it might just look like survival. The quiet instinct to keep breathing when the music stops. In America, stories of power often end in quiet rooms filled with secrets. As federal agents tighten their grip on the ongoing gambling and fraud investigations, the ripples are spreading far beyond the world of sports. What began as a few strange betting patterns and whispered conversations among insiders has exploded into one of the most tangled criminal webs in recent memory. At the center of it all are names once celebrated on magazine covers and highlight reels. People who once represented dreams, youth, and victory. Now they stand accused of deceit, greed, and betrayal. It's a story older Americans have seen too many times before. The glamour fades, the truth surfaces, and the mighty fall. The FBI has uncovered two sprawling operations that feel almost cinematic in their complexity. One involves insider sports betting, a high-stakes game where trust was traded for money and friendship was sold for advantage. Players who once symbolized teamwork and discipline are now accused of using confidential information to manipulate outcomes. They allegedly told gamblers when they'd leave games early, faked injuries, and quietly helped others win fortunes in illegal bets. In another darker layer, the mafia families that once ruled New York's underworld have returned to the headlines, not with guns and getaways, but with sleek technology, hidden cameras, and digital deception. Poker tables that looked like symbols of wealth and sophistication were in fact traps, tools of manipulation built by criminal engineers. Every hand was fixed, every deck was rigged, and every player was being watched. One victim, investigators say, lost nearly $2 million in a single night. Others lost far more over time. The numbers are staggering, not just in money, but in what they reveal about human weakness. These weren't strangers lured off the street. They were people invited into luxury apartments, sipping fine wine, shaking hands with celebrities. They believed they belonged, and that illusion cost them everything. Among those glittering locations, one address stands out: a multi-million-dollar Greenwich Village townhouse once home to Kylie Jenner and Travis Scott. A place once shown on national television as a haven of youth and glamour had, according to federal records, become a hub for illegal poker games tied to organized crime. To many older Americans, the irony feels almost poetic, a reminder that beneath the surface of fame, the shadows always linger. And still, behind all of this, the question remains: where does Diddy fit in? Some believe he doesn't, that he's just another fallen celebrity being dragged into speculation. But others aren't so sure. Diddy has always been more than a music mogul. He's a man who built bridges between industries, fashion, sports, television, nightlife, and who thrived on being everywhere. It's that very interconnectedness that now raises eyebrows. People who knew him in his prime describe a man who loved control. Cameras followed him not just because he was famous, but because he wanted them to. At his lavish parties, nothing happened without his awareness. Guests were filmed, watched, remembered. His life was an open secret, and that meant he saw things others didn't want seen. Now, locked behind steel bars, facing the cold reality of confinement, that awareness may have become his only bargaining chip. And in a place where every piece of information has value, that could mean everything. Rumors began swirling after reports of a prison altercation surfaced, the supposed knife-to-throat incident that made headlines. The suggestion was chilling, a power struggle even behind bars, threats, warnings, and maybe even attempts to silence him. And when 50 Cent's mocking comment appeared online, "Is he snitching now?" the tone of public conversation changed instantly. What started as a joke suddenly felt like a clue. Older viewers, many of whom grew up watching real-life mob takedowns and political scandals unfold live on television, recognized the pattern. It starts with denial. Then the rumors spread. Then slowly the truth seeps out, not through press conferences, but through the subtle movements of law enforcement, the quiet arrests, the sealed indictments. If Diddy is indeed talking, he wouldn't be the first powerful man to trade information for leniency. History is filled with examples. Men who built empires on charisma, only to save themselves by dismantling those empires from within. Whether it's Wall Street, Hollywood, or Washington, the pattern is the same. When the pressure mounts, the strong learn to whisper. But to understand the weight of what might be happening, you have to understand what life inside prison does to a person like Diddy. For decades, he was surrounded by sound, applause, music, laughter, the thump of bass, and the buzz of cameras. Now there's only silence. Days stretch endlessly. The night feels heavier. And somewhere in that emptiness, a man begins to think about what he's done, who he's trusted, and what he still has to lose. For a man who's spent his life commanding rooms full of people, the sudden loss of control can be unbearable. Prison isn't just a physical confinement, it's a psychological collapse. The power to move freely, to speak on your own terms, to decide your own future, all gone. In that kind of darkness, survival instincts sharpen in ways most of us can't imagine. Maybe Diddy is simply enduring. Maybe he's waiting. Or maybe he's doing what men have done for centuries when the walls begin to close in. Cooperating quietly, revealing small truths to earn small freedoms. It's not betrayal in his mind, it's strategy. It's staying alive. Meanwhile, federal investigators have promised that more arrests are coming. They've called these cases just the beginning. And if history is any guide, the entertainment world is about to face another wave of exposure. Every time one industry falls under investigation, whether it's sports, music, or film, another inevitably follows. The FBI's interest doesn't fade, it expands. That's why people can't shake the thought that Diddy might be part of something larger. Not just a prisoner, but a link in a chain of revelations stretching across fame, money, and influence. The connection between the NBA cases, the poker schemes, and the overlapping social circles of celebrities and executives suggests that these aren't isolated scandals. They're chapters in the same story. A story about what happens when fame becomes a mask and greed becomes the heartbeat of every decision. For the older generation, those who remember the rise and fall of Elvis, the scandals of the studio system, the corruption of the early record labels, this moment feels familiar. The faces change, but the theme remains. The more powerful the empire, the darker the secrets it hides. And so the public waits. Some with outrage, some with curiosity, and some with a quiet sense of pity. Because no matter what the headlines say, behind every downfall is a human being, flawed, frightened, and desperate to be remembered for something more than their mistakes. In Diddy's case, that desperation has a name: redemption. Whether he's snitching, surviving, or simply trying to find his way through a storm of his own making, one truth remains: power never disappears quietly. It goes out fighting, whispering, and sometimes confessing. As the investigations widen and new names begin to surface, the real question isn't just what did Diddy do? It's what does he know? And in a world built on secrets, that may be the most dangerous knowledge of all. There was a time when Diddy's name meant motion, the pulse of a generation, the sound of a party, the swagger of success. His music, his fashion, his confidence, they defined an era. To millions of Americans, he wasn't just an entertainer. He was the symbol of ambition itself, a man who climbed from the streets to the sky and built an empire along the way. But in the long echo of fame, silence has a way of finding everyone. Now, in a cold, gray cell, the man who once controlled rooms full of people sits alone. There are no cameras, no fans, no music. Only the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of his own thoughts. He has gone from being the host of the party to the prisoner of his past. Every night, he lies awake on a narrow mattress, listening to the distant sounds of prison life. The metallic slam of a door, the hollow echo of footsteps, the muffled arguments that fade into nothing. In those moments, the noise outside fades and the real sound begins: memory. He remembers the flashing lights, the cameras, the laughter of famous faces at his side. He remembers the crowds chanting his name, the warmth of applause that felt like sunlight. And then, as the memories grow darker, he remembers the mistakes, the betrayals, the faces that looked at him with fear instead of admiration. It's in that space between pride and regret that men begin to see who they really are. Diddy, once larger than life, now faces himself in the smallest of mirrors. And it's not the reflection he's used to. For decades, he was untouchable. He was the man who could turn failure into fame and rumors into headlines that only made him stronger. But power has a cruel way of masking weakness. The people around him, the bodyguards, the friends, the business partners, all played their parts. They protected his image, shielded him from the world, and told him what he wanted to hear. Now they're gone. In their place are guards, lawyers, and a justice system that no longer cares how many records he sold or who he once knew. Inside the prison walls, the rules are simple. Respect is earned through silence, not success. And a man like Diddy, known, watched, envied, becomes both a target and a mystery. The incident with the knife to his throat changed everything. Whether it truly happened as reported or not, it sent a message. His fame couldn't protect him anymore. That's when the whispers began, that maybe he was cooperating with authorities, maybe trading information to stay safe. In the outside world, people laughed or debated it online. But inside, rumors can be deadly. They travel faster than truth, and they shape how men survive. Diddy, a man who once built his brand on confidence, now walks with caution. Every look, every word, every step is calculated. He has learned that in confinement, silence can be armor. Yet, silence can also be a burden. Because in that silence, the past keeps talking. He thinks of the parties, the ones whispered about in the media, the ones filled with power and secrecy. He thinks of the people who came and went, the faces he trusted, the deals he made. He knows the FBI is still out there, digging deeper, connecting dots between celebrities, athletes, and old crime families. And whether or not he's directly involved, he can feel the web tightening. When he closes his eyes, he sees flashes of the world outside, the glittering city he once owned. But that city has moved on. The same headlines that once celebrated him now dissect his every move. The public that once cheered him now wonders what else he's hiding. And somewhere deep inside, that truth hurts more than the confinement itself. To older Americans watching this story unfold, it feels both familiar and tragic. They've seen legends fall before, stars who burned too bright, who believed their own myth, who forgot that fame is borrowed, not earned. Diddy's story isn't just about crime or rumors. It's about what happens when a man's image becomes his cage. Inside his cell, he's no longer the mogul, the trendsetter, or the king of anything. He's just Sean, a man stripped bare of the illusion that power could protect him from consequence. He wakes up to the same breakfast as everyone else. He wears the same uniform. He waits in the same lines. The hierarchy that once defined his life has dissolved into the quiet equality of confinement. There are moments, though, when the old instincts return. When a guard passes and he nods with that familiar half-smile. The same charm that once disarmed reporters and executives alike. But here, charm means nothing. Respect must be rebuilt from the ground up. And yet, beneath the pain, something human flickers. For the first time in decades, Diddy has no entourage, no team, no noise to drown out his thoughts. There's a strange purity in that, a loneliness that demands honesty. He can't control the narrative anymore. He can only live it. There's talk that he's begun writing. Some say it's a memoir. Others believe it's a journal meant for no one but himself. Either way, the act of writing, of putting memory into words, can be both confession and survival. For a man who once spoke in sound bites and press statements, this might be the first time he's truly speaking from the heart. Meanwhile, outside the walls, the world keeps spinning. The investigations continue. New names surface in connection to the gambling schemes. The FBI's press conferences hint that more revelations are coming. For those watching from the outside, it feels like the tip of an iceberg, a glimpse into a much deeper darkness that stretches through entertainment, sports, and beyond. And through it all, Diddy's name remains, hovering over the headlines like a shadow that refuses to fade. Whether guilty or innocent, complicit or scapegoat, he has become a symbol of something larger: the fallibility of power. Older Americans understand that symbol well. They've lived through decades of it, from Hollywood scandals to political betrayals, from church leaders to CEOs. Every generation learns the same truth: the higher a person rises, the further they have to fall. And so, as Diddy faces his quiet nights and long days, the world outside draws its own conclusions. Some pity him, some despise him, but all are drawn to the same question: what happens to a man who once had everything when the world finally takes it away? Perhaps he'll find redemption. Perhaps he'll fade into history as another cautionary tale. But right now, his story is still being written, line by line, headline by headline, whispered by strangers and studied by investigators. The music has stopped. The empire has crumbled. And all that remains is a man sitting alone, learning, perhaps for the first time, the true price of fame. In the aftermath of those revelations, silence settled over Hollywood like dust after a storm. For a time, it seemed that the world wanted to move on, to forget, to pretend that nothing had truly changed. But the truth has a strange way of lingering, of haunting even the most powerful figures who built their empires on charm and image. In private, there were whispers among agents, producers, and lawyers, quiet exchanges over late-night dinners where someone would finally sigh and say, "It's never really over, is it?" And they were right. For those who had watched the entertainment world rise from the glossy days of the late 1990s to the digital chaos of the modern age, the fall of one mogul was more than just a headline. It was a symbol, proof that no amount of money or status could shield a person from consequence forever. In homes across the country, ordinary Americans talked about it over morning coffee. They remembered the music, the parties, the glamorous red carpets. But they also remembered the arrogance, the feeling that some people believed they were untouchable. That feeling was now crumbling, and for the first time, Hollywood felt human. Behind closed doors, lawyers were negotiating deals that never made it to the public. Some associates were distancing themselves, deleting old photos and quietly rewriting history. Others, afraid of their own pasts, began to come forward, not with the hope of revenge, but with the quiet relief of confession. One assistant recalled the fear of speaking up years ago, the way her phone would buzz late at night with instructions she didn't dare question. Another told of parties that began as celebrations, but ended in regret and confusion. And as more voices emerged, a chilling pattern took shape, one that the industry could no longer ignore. Meanwhile, the mogul himself, once the face of a generation, found his world shrinking. The calls stopped. Invitations vanished. Once loyal friends began to speak about him in the past tense, as though he had already become a ghost in their world. The mansion that had once echoed with laughter and music was now filled with quiet. Only the soft hum of security cameras and the restless pacing of a man who realized, too late, that he had spent decades building walls instead of bridges. Outside those walls, the conversation was shifting. News outlets ran retrospectives, documentaries revisiting the golden age of entertainment and its dark underbelly. Younger audiences, raised in the era of transparency and social accountability, began to question why so many had looked away for so long. The internet became a living archive, videos resurfacing, interviews reanalyzed, and once-forgotten rumors suddenly sounding prophetic. What was once seen as gossip was now viewed as evidence, and the past was being rewritten in real time. But not everyone took joy in the downfall. Some older fans, those who had grown up admiring the mogul's hustle, felt conflicted. They remembered the good, the music that played at their weddings, the fashion that defined a decade, the spirit of ambition he once embodied. They asked themselves, can a legacy be both beautiful and broken? Can you separate the art from the artist when both are built from the same flawed hands? As weeks turned into months, the investigation deepened. Former employees began cooperating with authorities, offering records, emails, and testimony that painted a grim picture. What had once seemed like isolated scandals now appeared systemic, a culture of excess and entitlement that had been allowed to flourish unchecked. Each new revelation chipped away at the myth of control, until there was nothing left but a man facing the wreckage of his own creation. And then came the quiet reckoning. not in courtrooms or on television, but in the stillness of reflection. For the first time, those closest to the center began to speak not with anger, but with sorrow. They spoke of wasted talent, of friendships destroyed by ambition, of a generation that had been taught to chase fame at any cost. Some said it was karma, others called it justice. But for the people who had once loved him, it felt like mourning. Mourning not just for one man's fall, but for what it said about the world they had helped build. Hollywood, too, began to shift. Studios implemented new policies, labels reviewed old contracts, and managers held ethics meetings that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. It was as if the entire industry was trying to cleanse itself, to say, "We've learned." But deep down, most knew that real change doesn't come from policies, it comes from pain. And this, without question, had been one of Hollywood's most painful chapters. In the middle of all this, the mogul himself remained mostly silent. No public appearances, no statements, only glimpses, a blurred photo outside a courthouse, a grainy image of him walking alone near a luxury car he once flaunted with pride. The man who once commanded rooms with a single look was now avoiding cameras, shielding his face from the same media that once celebrated him. And yet, in that fall from grace, there was a strange kind of truth. A reminder that time humbles everyone, no matter how high they climb. Those who had worked with him remembered small moments of humanity. The times he quietly donated to schools, helped struggling artists, or gave advice that genuinely changed lives. Those moments didn't erase the wrongs, but they reminded people that behind every scandal, there's still a person, flawed, complicated, broken perhaps, but still human. For many, that was the hardest part to accept. It wasn't just the story of one man's downfall. It was the story of how power changes people, and how sometimes they don't realize the cost until it's far too late. In quiet corners of the city, his old songs still played. Taxi drivers hummed along. Shoppers nodded to familiar beats. The art lived on, even as the artist vanished. That's the paradox of fame. It outlives the flesh, but it carries the stain of its creator. And for those who listened closely, the music didn't sound quite the same anymore. It carried the weight of everything that had been lost: trust, innocence, hope. By the time the year drew to a close, the story had faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals and fresher faces. But for those who had witnessed it all, the lesson endured. The empire had fallen, yes, but in its ruins, the world had rediscovered something it had forgotten: accountability. The belief that no matter how powerful a person becomes, truth will find its way through. And somewhere, far from the flashing lights and the noise of fame, a man sat in silence, surrounded not by fans or followers, but by memories. Memories of what he once was, and what he had become. The world had moved on, but for him, time had stopped. That was the final price of power. Not the loss of wealth or status, but the unbearable weight of remembering everything you destroyed to reach the top. Time has a way of softening even the hardest stories. Months turned into years, and the name that once dominated every headline became just another memory in Hollywood's long, complicated history. For the first time in decades, the world no longer revolved around him. The mansions were quiet. The phones no longer rang. The gates that once kept people out now seemed to keep him in, a prisoner of his own making. The empire was gone, not taken by force, but eroded by truth, one revelation at a time. Every morning began the same way. A slow walk through empty halls filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. On the walls, framed photographs stared back like ghosts. Smiles from another lifetime, moments frozen in celebration. Each one now heavy with irony. He used to look at those pictures and see proof of success. Now he saw warnings he never recognized when it mattered. He'd built his life chasing applause, but when the clapping stopped, the silence was louder than anything he'd ever known. Sometimes late at night, he would turn on the TV and catch old interviews. Himself in his prime, confident and untouchable, preaching ambition like gospel. He'd shake his head, realizing how far he'd drifted from that man. Back then, he thought power was freedom. Now he understood it was a kind of prison, one built out of ego, surrounded by fear, and locked from the inside. For all the awards, the cars, the millions in the bank, none of it meant a thing when the people were gone. The irony was cruel. He had spent his life trying to be remembered, and now he was wishing he could forget. Outside his walls, the world kept spinning. New artists rose, new scandals came and went, and new stars were born every day. The entertainment machine never stopped. It simply replaced, repackaged, and moved on. Yet, beneath the surface, his story lingered like a cautionary tale. In industry circles, his name became shorthand for downfall, whispered in meetings, cited in legal seminars, used as a warning for young talent who thought fame was forever. "Remember what happened to him," they'd say. "He had it all." But life, even in disgrace, has a strange way of offering redemption, not through grand gestures, but through quiet moments. For the first time in years, he began to do something he'd never done before: listen. To others. To himself. To silence. In that quiet, painful space, he started to see the truth that had eluded him all his life. That power without humility destroys everything it touches. He had mistaken fear for respect, attention for love, and applause for forgiveness. Now, stripped of all of it, he was left with something rare and raw: honesty. Neighbors said he started taking long walks early in the morning, before the sun came up. Sometimes he'd stop at a park bench and just sit there, watching families pass by, parents holding hands, kids laughing, joggers waving as they passed. No one recognized him anymore, and strangely, that anonymity felt like freedom. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to be anything other than human. There was something deeply humbling in that. In one quiet act of atonement, he began donating money quietly, anonymously, through charities that helped the kind of kids he once claimed to inspire. He didn't seek headlines or public approval. In truth, he didn't want anyone to know. It wasn't about redemption in the public eye, it was about making peace with himself. Even small gestures, funding a music program, paying tuition for young artists, supporting shelters, were his way of saying, "I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can change what happens next." Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. For many, the pain was too deep. The victims, the friends betrayed, the colleagues silenced, they had built new lives without him. Some had moved on, others still struggled with scars that time couldn't heal. He would never ask them to forgive. Some things, he realized, aren't meant to be forgiven. They're meant to be learned from. And yet, as the years passed, something unexpected happened. The rage that once defined his name began to fade, replaced by a more complex truth. People didn't speak of him only with hatred anymore. They spoke of him as a symbol of how far the mighty can fall. Yes, but also of how fragile the illusion of power truly is. His story became a mirror, reflecting not just one man's mistakes, but the culture that allowed them to happen. The system that celebrated excess, encouraged ego, and looked away until it couldn't anymore. For the older generation, those who had grown up watching him rise and fall, it was bittersweet. They remembered the energy he brought to a room, the optimism of his youth, the soundtrack of their own lives wrapped in his success. It was impossible not to feel a hint of nostalgia, even amid disappointment. Because his story, like so many before him, wasn't just about fame or fortune. It was about the American dream itself, the belief that anyone could rise, no matter where they came from. But no one ever talked about what happens after you reach the top. How the higher you climb, the lonelier it gets, and how sometimes the fall is the only way to see the ground clearly again. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, he stood at the edge of his property, looking out over the city that had once worshipped him. The lights flickered like stars below, endless and indifferent. For the first time, he didn't feel bitterness or regret, just a quiet understanding. He whispered something to himself that only the wind could hear. Maybe this was how it was supposed to end. Not in fame, not in flames, but in reflection. In silence. And somewhere, in a small recording studio across town, a young artist was singing into a microphone, chasing the same dream he once had, bright-eyed, hungry, and full of belief. The circle continued. The industry moved on. But his story, his rise, his fall, his lesson, would live on in the whispers, in the warnings, and in the hearts of those who learned from it. In the end, the legacy wasn't the records, or the headlines, or the money. It was the lesson left behind. That success without compassion is hollow, that fame without integrity is fleeting, and that no empire, no matter how mighty, can outlast the truth. And so the curtain finally fell, quietly, without applause, without spectacle. Just the soft echo of a life that had burned too bright, too fast, for too long. The silence after the storm wasn't empty. It was peaceful. And in that peace, perhaps, there was finally redemption. Not for the world, but for the man who had finally learned what it meant to be human again.